is Naisha Roberts. I am the managing broker for a la carte Bahamas Realty, and I was at home on the eastern end of Lucaya when Dorian hit.
So as a Grand Bahamian, I know that you lived abroad for some time, but you have been back for a while, so you've likely weathered at least some storms. In what ways was Dorian like previous storms in terms of the anxieties, the fears, the preparations of Grand Bahamians, and if in any ways was it different at all?
The preparation, the anxiety, the fear, it was pretty much the same. I think we might have had a little bit more anxiety simply because we were forecasting to have a bigger storm. But the same preparation went into place for everything, grocery shopping, stocking up, getting hardware supplies. That was all the same. The outcome was not the same, though.
That is very true. And that is because, in your opinion, Hurricane Dorian was different in which ways? The size, the scope, the nature of the damages, because the Grand Bahama community had already suffered so much because the economy had lagged. Like, in what ways was the outcome different?
I think the magnitude and the widespread area that the storm devastated was different. We've had other storms in the past that have hit pocketed areas in the island, but this storm managed to impact the eastern end of the island, the northern and the central end of the island, and maybe some parts of the western end of the island. So I think we had more widespread devastation with this storm. Areas that have never flooded or rarely ever flooded this time. Central Freeport, downtown area, those areas have pretty much been protected for the most part in most storms. But for homeowners to get almost 5-6 feet of water that far inland, that was definitely new. And then again, the magnitude of the flooding in terms of the waterfront properties, how high canal front homes sustained flooding. It felt like when you looked at it afterwards, a lot of these homes looked as though they had a tornado in addition to a hurricane. So the damage was definitely, it was more destructive.
Yeah, I have heard some people describe it as a tornado first and then a hurricane on top of it, and then maybe a flood added on the back of it. So you talked about the unprecedented nature of the damages, the size, the scale, the scope of the storm, and also of the challenges that had to be faced in its aftermath. But you were on the eastern end of the island. So prior to Hurricane Dorian, had that community experienced severe flooding? Did it this time? I mean, what did that mean for you personally in terms of where you were during the storm?
That area where
Sorry, you're gonna have to. I don't know who's talking. Sorry, absolutely said nothing.
Sorry.
It's not your fault. But now you could stand and touch this. This is what have a mind of it on? Yeah, listening. Yeah.
So where are we picking up from?
But I'll ask the question again. Maybe don't do this one. I'm just sick, right? Want me to put it in the car? No, just put it over there.
She always mishearing.
When you talking off, she don't respond.
Right.
So in terms of the size, the scale, the scope of the storm, obviously unprecedented in ways in which we hadn't imagined, flooded, destroyed areas, pockets of the island, entire communities that had previously been untouched. In terms of your personal experience, what did that mean for where you were at home during the storm?
Where I was at, we ended up having to move cars, so they were strategically covered by the building. We watched our backyard get flooded relatively quickly. For 2 days, we sat there just wondering if our windows were going to be able to sustain the storm. And my mother, who lives on the canal not too far from me, also in the east, when we went to her house afterwards, it was completely destroyed. And her house is built 5 feet off of the ground. So to have water of nearly 20 feet, almost to her ceiling, that's almost 12 feet. So to have that amount of water and to see the amount of damage that something like that, it's just unimaginable. It was a war zone when we went back to her house. And even for her, we still had to evacuate her from her home, her other home downtown, where she thought she would have been better protected because she's been better protected in previous storms there. So we had to go and get her from there as well, excuse me. But for us, we didn't sustain much damage outside of little minor things to our personal home and flooding in the backyard. But neighbors lost parts of their roof. Tiles were flying all around. Debris was in the entire backyard. Trees were down everywhere on our street. And no power, of course, for weeks.
What does that mean in terms of almost to a certain degree, a sense of survivor's guilt, watching people all around you endure so much? I think that most Grand Bahamians and Abaconians coped with that by not wallowing, not accepting, not giving into it, by essentially serving others. You know, it just seemed to be almost immediately every single person who could be useful to someone else found some utility to offer.
Yep. Right after the storm, because we have such a strong connection to Florida, we had friends that brought over boatloads and boatloads of supplies almost the next day. My house was filled to the brim with boxes of everything that you could possibly imagine that might have been necessary. And friends and myself and my family mobilized relatively quickly to get those donations out to the children's home, to people that we knew, to the Humane Society. Everything that came into my house that day and over a period of days was gone right away. And then organizations that I was involved with also assisted with donations. But I think one of the things that, even though I personally didn't sustain the level of damage that other people may have, I was very fortunate to be in a position to give back and do for so many other people, especially since as a real estate agent, one of the things that I did right after the storm was provide housing for the insurance companies that were on island. So they were jockeying for the same rentals that a lot of the locals needed. And with working with them, I was going into hundreds of homes that were damaged. And those individuals were also getting aid from so many people. The amount of aid that Grand Bahama received after Dorian, that in itself is unprecedented. But being in a position to provide and assist, that, you know, it made me feel pretty good. It was still depressing though, because the need was just so great.
I'm certain of that. And how did you balance, I guess, processing one's own grief, one's own trauma with being useful? I mean, what do you do with it? Do you pack it away for another day? Do you process it as much as you can, you know, in each moment, and then move on to the next? I mean, what do you do with that when you're going into hundreds of homes, seeing where people have had anywhere from some loss to everything lost?
You compartmentalize. There's really no time to wallow in it because you're not useful to anybody. Just wallowing. So at that point in time, my biggest focus was getting the insurance adjusters there, making sure that these customers' needs were met, that, you know, they can get their process wrapped up as quickly as they possibly could in order to facilitate insurance checks and getting them on their road to recovery. So there was you just compartmentalize that grief and mobilize to do what you need to do, because there are things other people are depending on you for.
And was it at all shocking? Like, at what point would the shock have abated and been replaced with a sense of resolve? Like, okay, this is our actual reality. Like, this is not a movie. This is not a dream. This is terrible, but it's also true.
Reality set in pretty quickly, actually. when you factor in that you've been going through a storm for 2 days and you've tried to get to people for at least 24 hours after the storm had started, you basically are just trying to do whatever you can do to get things done. It took a while. You adjusted to the situation as it is because it's shock and it's awe. You're driving down the street and you're seeing cars flooded by water. You're seeing homes damaged everywhere. And you can't, get away from the fact that you have no power. Pretty much almost the entire island has no power. So you really don't have time to adjust. You just have to deal with it. And Bahamians, especially Grand Bahamians, it's not our first storm. So that same resilience that we've always shown came back, and you just had to deal with it.
Well, personally, and as a Grand Bahamian, I see very clearly how you could take that all on. How do you balance that with your professional role? Not just in, I guess, the very clear line of I'm assisting Grand Bahamians in either receiving some aid or having a plan to receive some aid, but there's been lots of conversation in the wake of disasters about disaster real estate opportunities. How do you balance out as a Grand Bahamian, as someone who has incurred some loss, even via friends, family, loved ones, with your professional role to facilitate what we would like to think of as always a very pleasant experience, but in this in this instance might be forced by unfavorable circumstances?
Well, you have to mitigate both sides. And there was certainly an opportunity after Dorian. It was an opportunity for locals to rebuild, restart their lives. There was an opportunity for people who were looking to get into the market to capitalize on the storm itself. What we found right after Dorian is that a lot of people who lost homes, the immediate need for them was rentals. And that was the challenge, not having enough inventory on the island. And then having such a demand for that same inventory between locals and guests who are here to assist. Because remember, again, we've got adjusters on island, we've got Samaritan's Purse on island, and they all need a place to stay. So that was a challenge initially. But after you placed people, now the challenge is for them is, what do I do with my home? Do I keep my home? Do I repair my home? Do I sell my home? Some people use that opportunity to sell homes as is. And for foreign investors or locals who were in a position to capitalize on that, that worked out to both parties' benefits. But there are some people who still to this day have not done anything with those homes. They might have used their insurance proceeds to purchase a piece of property and rebuild somewhere else, or purchase a condo and use that time to downsize. Now, the downside of something like that is that you've had people who've walked away from these damaged properties now, and you've had people who have rebuilt in those damaged properties. Those damaged properties now are going to impact other owners because those properties are sitting in disarray, and now it's affecting the value for the other homeowners who have chosen to go back into their homes. So that's going to present a problem for us in the future, but it created an opportunity for people to get from out under those damaged homes and restart. It's created an opportunity for people who may have never owned to get out there and purchase one of those damaged homes, and do repairs to that. And then for the investor who wants to scoop up hurricane damaged homes, they were able to get commodities at a good price.
That's a lot of moving parts. What does that mean for the fate and future of real estate on Grand Bahama? I mean, I would tend to think of it, some people think of it as all very, very bad. And I do not think that is complete story. I think that is a story of the Grand Bahamian experience, but I don't think that is representative of every story. And so perhaps you have some Grand Bahamians who are experiencing the worst of times, but there are other pockets of Grand Bahama that are experiencing the best of times.
Right.
So what do you see in terms of the marketplace for Grand Bahama as a viable home, either to people who already live here, who want to live here, or are merely looking to spend, either lots of time here or multiple times here a year?
Well, I think Dorian put us a little bit more on the map in good and bad ways. The bad ways because of the devastation, but in good ways because it showed that the Bahamas was still a viable option for people who want to invest. From a local perspective, a lot of Bahamians have used that opportunity to rebound. They still see that we are capable and able to do things. The downside with Dorian is that COVID came as we were just really ramping up our reconstruction, because right after Dorian, we saw a boom in reconstruction, and we're still experiencing that to a certain degree. If you drive around the island, you'll see a lot of new homes that are going up. So people use that opportunity to really start investing and building homes again. And from a foreign perspective, a lot of our overseas buyers use that opportunity to scoop up hot hurricane impacted properties. And I think we're going to continue to be viable. Our economy needs to grow a bit more, but that construction that we've seen and we're experiencing still has gone a long way because it's kept people employed. So Dorian might not have been the best thing for us, but I think it's given us an opportunity to, like the phoenix, rise through the ashes. And we've seen parts of that becoming evident on the island.
And so for a lot of people, we sell so much of ourselves as Bahamians, we're selling the sun, the sea, we're selling our congeniality, our hospitality. Mm-hmm. And it might seem to them that this is almost like a pylon to a pylon, the whole perspective of this is basically a new commodity to me that is a result of a very devastating experience for the vast majority of the people who live and work here, who, mm-hmm. We're not vacationing, it's our lives. What kinds of conversations have there been, or may there still need to be, to educate homeowners, property owners about what they need to do in order to insulate themselves from basically being forced to make a decision that they otherwise would not make? I mean, I'm sure that in many instances, other people jumped at it, mm-hmm. thought it was wonderful, but there had to mm-hmm. be instances where people felt hopeless, powerless, and, without really choice,
mm-hmm.
Without the ability to make the choice to stay
mm-hmm.
in their properties.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what kinds of conversations should we be having with them in this time, in after Dorian, and certainly, with the hope that we never face something like this again. But in the event that we do, what should we be saying?
Well, the only way to be better prepared for a Dorian type event, as you say, insulate yourself, is planning. A lot of what happened, a lot of that insecurity that people feel, a lot of the inability to make independent decisions and not feel forced to make decisions comes from security. So the only way that you're going to feel secure, be secure, is to plan properly. Have good home insurance. You'd be amazed how many people did not have proper home insurance. They had maybe just enough insurance as they might have thought, but when the insurance adjusters evaluate your claims, they find that you're underinsured. So you have to make sure that your homes are properly insured. And then on top of that, you should be saving, because when any eventuality hits, you want that security of knowing that you've at least have a chunk of change in the bank so you can relax and not feel as stressed. So insurance, savings, planning, and an exit strategy. You really have to define what your give and what your take is going to be, what you're going to be willing to give up and what you're going to be willing to tolerate. But that's really the best way to assist yourself, is to actually assist yourself. We can't be living paycheck to paycheck. You have to prepare and plan as best as you can.
You have personal responsibility on the one hand. Mm-hmm. So what other kind of, not preventative, but what kind of other preparedness should there be from other entities, be they corporate or governmental? What is really necessary in order to change the culture so that people are in this position, and they know really to be in this position? I think in a lot of instances, it is really seen, unfortunately, like most things that are necessities in our lives, as though it's an option. Like, okay, I mean, my back is against the wall, and so I'm going to choose. It's almost like, having a toothache and choosing the painkiller and not the antibiotic. I mean, it's really not, there's no good choice here, but this is not the right choice. So, you have a depressed economy, you have unemployment. Many people would say, well, I'd like to have savings, or, I'd like to be able to afford insurance. So it really takes, I think, the cooperation of both, public and private, and in a bunch of different industries, and insurance being certainly chief among them. I mean, part of the reason I think that some people are underinsured is not just because that's what they can afford, but because their insurer is comfortable underinsuring them at a rate that they can afford, right?
Right.
And so it is a very difficult position, I think, for most Grand Bahamians who, I don't think that those blue tarps are on those roofs,
out of choice.
of choice, as we saw in the aftermath of Matthew. So just looking at all of the storm and hurricane destruction, damage, loss, trauma that Grand Bahamians have experienced, can you give us some sense of hopefulness about Grand Bahama and its future, and really how that is made possible by seeing our possibilities and instead of just our problems? Because obviously, if you have people who are interested in the island, interested in owning property, interested in living here, there must be something great about it that perhaps we find normative and we don't really see as exceptional as the rest of the world sees it. Like, what are those things that make us still attractive to other people that we ourselves don't recognize? I
think what you're talking about is a plight of humanity. We have a tendency to take for granted the things that we are used to. And we're used to our sun, sand, and sea. So we don't appreciate it the way other people might appreciate it. We don't even maybe explore as much as we probably should. But the appeal for Grand Bahama and the appeal for the Bahamas is that sun, sand, and sea that other people don't get, that we wake up to every single day. So I think that we should be proud, and I think the onus is not just on us, but as you said, our leadership, whether in Parliament or our leadership for our city leaders, to ensure that they are maintaining our beautiful country. They're maintaining our beautiful island. They are assisting the people of the island. Again, we received so many donations after the storm, so those donations should be allocated properly so that we don't have blue tarps on the roofs anymore. Yes, we're still trying to dig our way through Dorian, and we got a double whammy with COVID now, so we've been set back a little bit. But there's a lot to be hopeful for. We have a new steward of the airport. We have the hotel is reopening. COVID isn't going to be here forever, and I think for a very long time, right after Dorian, Grand Bahamians were so ready to get back to normal that when we got sat back down with COVID, that increased some of that anxiety because we were ready to get out of our Dorian life. So we're in that Dorian/COVID life, and people are really ready to get past that. So we really just need to get reinvigorated with enjoying our little island, enjoying the possibilities of better future for our little island, because people are continuing to invest. People are continually calling every day. They're continually emailing, wanting to be here. They're looking to invest in our country, and we are positioned as Bahamians. We already have everything that they want. So we should just take advantage of it as best as we possibly can and hold those people accountable who should be assisting us more, hold their feet to the fire so we make them do what we need them to do for us.
So, you talk about sun, sand, and sea. I mean, is that like primary in terms of the attractiveness of people to the island? I would imagine, there are other things about the pace of life, the quality of life, presumable levels of safety, in the immediate aftermath of Dorian. There was a lot of conversation about anarchy and, martial law and just things that were not necessary because Grand Bahamians rose to the challenge, were able to suck up things that were unimaginable and to be orderly and respectful. I mean, except at four-way intersections. But with the exception of that, pretty much do all of the things that we think were a part of the value system, of the culture of what it means to be Bahamian, right? And so what parts of that do Grand Bahamians have a responsibility in terms of not littering, in terms of eliminating or limiting, but ideally eliminating plastic use? Like, what are some of the things that Grand Bahamians need to be doing, not just to merely be attractive to people who wish to live here or visit here, but ultimately for ourselves and our own futures?
I think that the best way we can help ourselves, like you said, is to care for our environment, keep it clean and pristine. Keep our beaches nice. Be cordial, like you said. Customer service goes a long way. When we talk about guests coming to our country, they are coming here because of our quiet way of life, because we have relative safety, because Grand Bahama has quick ease of access to North America. But what keeps them coming back is that customer service, that feeling like they're down home, that island feel, that laid backness. But no one wants to go to a country if you don't know how to treat the visitors. So for us individually, that probably services are bread and butter. So that's probably one of the best things that we can do for our customer experience, is to give good customer service.
Yeah, and I think, again, harkens back to the childhood, recitation, charity begins at home and ends abroad. And I think that, the first kind of rule of great customer service would be to, serve each other's and ourselves well. And I think that in some instances, it seems easier for people to put on a uniform and pretend to be nice.
Right.
But also, it's probably because for a lot of Grand Bahamians, we are pretending to be well. I mean, it's just trauma on top of trauma. A hurricane on top of hurricane, now, COVID on top of Dorian.
Yep.
And in some ways, some of the kind of compartmentalization you mentioned in the immediate aftermath of the storm is, we're still trying to apply that same thing every day. But it's not meant to be a long-term fix.
Exactly.
Right? It's just, it just like, bridges you from this moment to the next. And so you have an economy and a people who are traumatized with issues that they may not be
vocalizing.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
And I wonder, what is the awareness of investors or of potential property owners to the realities that most Grand Bahamians, or a great deal of Grand Bahamians, face, not just in terms of the aftermath and the trauma of Dorian itself, but just in terms of their actual socioeconomic realities?
from a foreign perspective, our overseas buyers, they may not necessarily be factoring in our socioeconomics of the individual islands when they look to invest. But there are a lot of people who have invested after the storm because of those same socioeconomics. There is a group out of Florida that purchased some properties for a charity. And they use that to bridge a gap with their young people in Florida with our young people over here. So they've created different opportunities for outlets for our young people here. And that's some conscious investing that has happened as a result of Dorian that may not have happened prior to that. But by and large, our other visitors may not necessarily take our mindset or, like you said, our socioeconomics into consideration when they're purchasing. They're looking at the glamorized side of the island, not necessarily the nitty gritty of the people.
Yeah, and that's pretty representative everywhere. I do think that with the rise of Black Lives Matter and different protest demands, different equality demands, particularly in, with our neighbors in the United States, there's kind of some of that spillage of goodwill, and even if it's only like guilt goodwill, but also an awareness that all things are not the same in every instance.
Correct.
What is ultimately your hope for Grand Bahamians? What is it that you wish for us, maybe in 10 or 20 or more years, in terms of, real estate, but also more broadly, to, the everyday experience of the everyday Grand Bahamian, and also of those who come and either call our shores home or temporarily home?
Well, I guess my wish for Grand Bahama and the people of Grand Bahama is that we are able to grow our economy where our individual households are impacted, where salaries and income can increase and we can be a little bit more self-sustaining. My hope is that our economy grows to a point that everybody's employed, where we can get back to a point where instead of the exodus from the island, we have the exodus to the island. And not so much that we get over commercialized with hotels everywhere, but that we're an island that's able to grow while still maintaining that island charm, and that we learn from the good stewards that we have had that had this vision for this island. And we learn from the people who have given us goodwill. And we sow those same seeds of goodwill in our youth and in our neighbors. And we just kind of get back to that good old island home feel, and that we're just healed.
You talk about learning. What lessons do you think, having survived Dorian, that God would have us to learn? Large lessons, large kind of ethereal lessons, but also like just practical lessons in terms of, you spoke earlier about having insurance, having appropriate levels of insurance. I would presume, things around preparedness. So first, what are those like literal lessons that we can see, those things that we can do, that we can actualize as we prepare for hurricane seasons? And much larger than that, what do you think are the lessons that we learned about ourselves and each other in the wake of the worst hurricane on Martin's record?
I think we learned that our neighbors were much more willing to give than we might have expected. And when I say our neighbors, I'm talking about us within the island itself. We saw a lot of Bahamians helping Bahamians. So I think our biggest lesson out of all of that is to just help, to give of self and to be selfless and to continue that goodwill, because then that goodwill will come back to you. I think the other lesson outside of preparation and saving and planning, the other lesson that we might have learned is to live in the moment, because I vividly recall partying and hanging out a month before Dorian came. So you don't put off for today things that you can, or for tomorrow things that you can do today. So you have to live and enjoy that moment, because things can change in the blink of an eye.
Interview by Dr. Crystal A. DeGregory, April 2021. Funding for this interview was provided by the International Organization for Migration Bahamas. Dorian and Beyond, battered but not broken. For more information, please visit us online at www.dorianandbeyond.org.